Hey folks, welcome back. Today I thought it would be wise to go through and take a look at the army cards used within Heroscape, as there's a lot to understand here. The first thing you might notice about them is the shape. Love it or hate it, it is unique. The hexagonal edges do make storing them somewhat cumbersome, but there's really nothing that can top the satisfaction of interlocking the cards of your army in front of you like this. So satisfying. During the first attempted relaunch of the game back in 2022, Avalon Hill pitched some pretty radical departures from the tried and true format. I could talk at lengths about how much I slug and hate these designs, but my doctor told me I had to stop accosting the other patients. Thankfully, we didn't get those, and when Renegade Game Studios took over the license in 2024, they stuck with the original format with some minor cosmetic changes. By the way, transparent CD sleeves like these are a great way to protect your cards if you take them out to events. I'll link the ones I use in the description. One thing that is often glossed over about Heroscape army cards is that there are actually two sides to them. One for the master game and one for the basic game. Nearly everyone seems to play the master game rules, but I'm definitely a slug who will sit down and play a basic game scenario from time to time. The main difference between the two is that the basic game ignores the abilities and wound marker system of the master game. Instead, every figure is destroyed if they fail their defense roll, and there are no special powers. I think it's admirable that Heroscape has retained compatibility with this entry-level rule set, even if no one ever really uses it. I might share more thoughts on the basic game in a future video, but for now, let's focus on two pieces of information that are listed here and nowhere else on the card. The first is the planet or world the hero or squad has been summoned from. Alongside Earth, Heroscape has its own host of distant places. Alpha Prime, Mar, Phaland, Nox Dorma, to name a few. The second piece of info is the series and figure number that this particular army card belongs to, a fairly standard feature of any game involving collectible cards. The master game side of the card is where we really get down to business. Here we find a whole menagerie of information, but I'll try to go through it sequentially here. In the top left corner, we get the figure's name and which Valkyrie general they fight for. Below the name and affiliation is where the abilities of the army card are listed. Currently, every figure in the game has some kind of power that elevates them beyond their mere stat block. This stat block is located to the lower right side and contains all the nitty-gritty info. How many spaces can you move? How distant can your target be? How many dice do you roll when you attack? How many dice do you roll when you're attacked? The basic game side has this information too, but the master game expands upon that by also listing the figure's life and point total. The former of these dictates how many wounds a figure can suffer before being destroyed. The latter tells you how much this army card would cost to draft within your ranks. 500-point armies have largely become the standard, but you can alter this to your liking. Personally, I really enjoy playing games with a 400-point total, as you still have enough to work with and games don't drag out too long. Folks looking for a more epic game should seek out 600 points or more. Above the stat block is the card art. In Heroscape's original run, this was simply a stylized photograph of the miniatures. Since the relaunch though, this has been replaced by a graphic art rendition of the characters. I don't know which style I personally prefer, but you would not believe the stir this small change caused within the online community. Woo! All's I'll say is at least we avoided getting this awful rendered artwork from Avalon Hill that made Heroscape look like a cheap MOBA or hero shooter video game. And I'm doing it again, aren't I? Sorry, folks. Sorry. In the rightmost corner, we get a very unique bit of visual information. This indicates which parts of the figure are targetable hit zones for ranged attacks, and where to draw a line of sight from when targeting figures. The red demarks valid hit zones, the gray invalid hit zones, and the green dot tells you if you're red-green colorblind. So, in this example, Atlaga the Kiri warrior is trying to attack Empress Kiova, who has taken cover. Atlaga cannot see any of her valid hit zones from this position, so he cannot use his normal attack against her. However, his Bolt of the Witherwood special ability only requires clear sight of his target, and gray hit zones can be used for this. Attacks need red, sight needs, well, sight. Pretty easy to remember though. The leftmost side of the card contains a ton of information about the figure in a very small space. Every item listed here can be the potential target for bonding or various other powers in the game. Starting at the top, we have the character's species. Some species, like Soulborgs, have immunities to certain powers that explicitly omit them from their effects. The next piece of information is a critical one: the type of army card. Currently in Heroscape, there are 5 different types of army cards: unique heroes, unique squads, common heroes, common squads, and uncommon heroes. Let's go through them one at a time. Unique heroes are the namesake of this game. One card represents one figure, and their unique status means that you can only draft one of any hero within your army. When they're wounded, you place wound markers on their card. Intuitive and easy to understand. Unique squads are very similar in that you can only draft one of each within your army. However, their squad status means that each order marker activation allows you to utilize all the figures listed on the card. Up until 2024, all squad figures had 1 life, meaning that they were destroyed outright whenever they suffered a wound. Since Age of Annihilation, though, 2 life squads have started to crop up, and this presents some problems. Remember how I mentioned that wound markers were placed on a figure's card? Well, how am I to know which member of the squad this wound marker is supposed to apply to? I suppose you could place it over top of their hit zone section, but by far the most common strategy I've seen employed is placing the wound marker on the base of the figure or turning them into a member of Devo. Are we not men? Are we not men? Common heroes are an interesting concept introduced very early on into the life of the game. Essentially, they function exactly like unique heroes, except that you can draft multiples of them into your army. One order marker still activates one figure, but you can activate any one of your common heroes that match the card. Because you don't need to keep track of which common hero is linked to which specific card, you can roll up with multiple common heroes of the same type, all represented with one card. Just like with squad figures though, historically this has meant that all common heroes are 1 life and do not collect wounds for similar reasons. With the advent of multi-life squads though, maybe we'll see multi-life common heroes in the future too. Common squads are the bread and butter of most competitive armies in this game. Just like common heroes, you can draft multiples of them in your army, but because of their squad nature, each order marker activates as many figures as listed on the card. Many common squads gain power and versatility when you draft more of them, as they don't feel their losses like unique squads do. If I field only a single squad of Abrian archers, and my opponent destroys one before I can use them, now I'm left with only 2 figures when I reveal my order marker. However, if I field multiple squads of Abrian archers and the same scenario happens, I don't feel the loss of the single figure, as I can still activate any 3 of them when it comes to my turn, given my reserves. Each squad card will indicate how many figures are activated every time you reveal an order marker on them. There are squads of 2, 3, 4, and even 5 on the horizon. Here's a demonstration of how this works. I reveal an order marker on my Abrian archers. I can now move and attack with any 3 of them. It doesn't matter which 3, so long as the ones I move are also the ones I attack with. You can't move 3 and attack with a different 3, for example. Anyways, hopefully you can see how powerful common squads are when massed together. The necessity of them in the higher echelons of play sometimes leads folks to calling this game Squadscape instead of Heroscape. Personally, I think there's a distinct difference between optimal and best when it comes to army design. An optimal army assumes infinite access to resources, which the vast majority of players do not have. Don't go out and buy 5 squads of 4th Massachusetts Line just because it's optimal to do so. Do what's best for you. For me, that means only 2 squads of 4th Mass. Wait Then Fire is a pretty boring ability anyways. I'm uninterested in playing the optimal army and derive much more joy from playing one that's either unorthodox, thematic, or both. Play the army you want to play. This brings us to the final type of army card, Uncommon Heroes. This figure type wasn't introduced until Heroscape switched hands when Wizards of the Coast took over, and it shows. Uncommon heroes are similar to common heroes in that you can draft multiples of them, but each uncommon hero must have a unique corresponding card in order to track their wounds. To do this, you must indicate which figures relate to which cards by marking them with matching stickers or some similar method. Additionally, as a sort of rules retcon, uncommon heroes are treated as unique heroes when it comes to abilities that target them. So, they're unique sometimes and common other times. This is kind of a mess. You can immediately tell that the game wasn't designed with this concept in mind, with how unintuitive its implementation was here. I can understand from a design space why this type of figure was introduced, but that mechanical desire did not translate well into a fluid user experience, in my opinion. Lots of folks out there like uncommon heroes, and I certainly understand the appeal. For this slug, though, I hope we saw the last of them with D&D. And those are the 5 types of army cards. That was quite the detour, but let's finish up with the last 3 pieces of information located on an army card. I promise these won't take nearly as long. The next 2 descriptors are very similar in their function in-game: class and personality. Besides adding a little flavor to the card, these 2 distinctions are often made relevant by synergies with other cards in your army. Warden 816 grants any guards in your army +1 move, so it's best to pair him with army cards that have the guard class, for example. The Sacred Band gain an additional defense die if the rest of your army has the disciplined personality, and so on. Finally, we arrive at the figure's size and height. There are 4 size classes in Heroscape: small, medium, large, and huge. Some abilities can only affect figures of a certain size. For instance, Deadeye Dan can only target small or medium figures with his Ular enhanced rifle special attack. A figure's height is denoted with the number next to the size. This number represents roughly how many tiles tall each sculpt is. This becomes relevant in situations where adjacency is trying to be determined, or if a figure is trying to climb steep terrain. In both cases, if the terrain is as tall or taller than the figure next to it, they cannot engage with the hex above them. The relative rarity of this happening will entirely depend on the types of maps you create. And I think that's it. We did it! Hopefully you walk away from this with a greater understanding of army cards within Heroscape, or I have at the very least edutained you for the duration of this video. I have lots of fun ideas for the future, so stay tuned. I've been your host, RR Slugger, and until next time, happy scaping.